Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for webinar number 2 for the Ascend Impact Challenge. This year, the Impact Challenge is addressing business model innovation for small businesses so that they can survive and thrive during COVID. So today, we are very lucky to have Roger Park. He's coming to us from Ernst & Young. He is an innovation expert and a business model expert. So we are lucky to have him. What he says will help you with the beginning of your project. So as you're thinking about what your idea is, think about the different components that you need to think about to make your business model idea innovation complete. So we will have him speak for about 15 minutes, and then there'll be a follow-up of 15 minutes for Q&A. And then after that, everyone will have a chance to ask their questions about the challenge itself. So Roger, if you can take it away.
All right, thanks, Christine, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all and looking forward to any questions you might have. But let me start by talking a little bit about innovation. So first, my background. Like Christine said, I work for EY. I'm a partner at EY. I lead innovation across the Americas for us. That's North and South America, and also includes Israel, which makes no sense, but I don't really complain because there's a lot of innovation going on in Israel, so we'll include them if we can. Innovation for us, my role is across all of our business units. So not just our consulting business, but also our audit, tax, transactions business, and all of our internal functions. So while we're talking to our clients about innovation, we're also driving a lot of internal innovation, a big organization at EY, 75,000 people in the Americas. So hopefully I can share some insights based on the conversations that we've had and some of the things that we've learned. But let me start by agreeing on the definition of innovation, because innovation can really mean anything if you want it to, which is good for me because I have innovation in my title. So I like it to be as broadly defined as I can. But I think it's useful to think of innovation as just very simply finding new ways to create value. Just doing something in a new way to see if you can do it better, a little bit better, new products, new services, new ways to engage your customers, your employees, your business partners, even other stakeholders like your regulators and investors. It could be a new way of doing a process that's a little bit more efficient, or a new way of allocating capital that gets you higher returns, or managing your risk better and managing the risk of innovation. So if you think about innovation as that, we've all been doing innovation for a long time, right? Any successful organization today has a history and heritage of having created value at some point in their long history. So what's different? Why is innovation so important now, and especially now with the COVID crisis? What's different is the incredible pace of change and disruption that we're having to deal with and respond to. I was just on a call with one of my clients, a bank, large multi-regional bank, and they said, they're saying, I said, it feels like the next 10 years of disruption have been compressed into the last 6 months with COVID. And they said that the way that they like to characterize it is, it's like you went to sleep in 2020 and you woke up in 2030. That's how much change we're dealing with right now. And in order to deal with that change, we have to come up with new ways of creating value, new ways of working, new processes, new products, new services, new ways to engage customers and employees. So I think that definition is very useful. Now, why is it important for companies to innovate? Hopefully I don't have to convince you all that it's important to try new things, but let me give you a bit of a story, a cautionary tale. You've all heard the Kodak story, right? It's the tried and true example of being disrupted. And they're going to be teaching this in business school for decades. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but a couple salient points. In 2008, some numbers, they were a $24 billion company, 125,000 employees, and had about 80 to 90% of the market share for film. They were at the top of their game, dominated their industry. But then in 2012, they went bankrupt. And what happened? Let's tease this apart a little bit. What didn't happen was that they weren't outcompeted. Until the day that Kodak went bankrupt, they had the best executives in the world, best talent, strongest brand, good capital position. Those executives were running the business as well as they could. The problem was that they weren't really in the film industry, were they? Right? So what the reason that they weren't in the film industry, and some of you might have never have bought film, but I used to buy film. And I'll tell you, I wasn't buying film to stockpile film in my basement and resell it later in the secondary markets. Film itself has no value, right? The reason I bought film, well, all of us bought film, was to capture and share experiences. And as soon as companies figured out how to capture and share experiences without film, those companies didn't outcompete Kodak. They made their entire industry irrelevant. So what was the mistake that Kodak made? I think one mistake that they made was they lost focus on the value that they were creating for their customer because they were too focused on what they thought they were good at doing, right? Best film company in the world, but all their customers cared about were capturing, sharing experiences. As soon as those two things diverge and you lose sight of what value you're actually creating for your customer, you open yourself up to disruption. And with technology moving as fast as it is, the risk of disruptions is very, very high. So we can't let that happen. So that's one thing. You have to stay focused on your customer and the value that you create, your value proposition. The second lesson I think is worth learning from the Kodak story. Like I said, lots of lessons to be learned, but important for you all and important for us certainly at EY, is that in 2012, the same year that Kodak went bankrupt, coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, Instagram was acquired by Facebook. I assume you all know what Instagram is, right? And at the time, I don't know if you remember this, at the time they were acquired by Facebook for $1 billion, which isn't a lot of money nowadays. So back then I was thinking, I remember thinking, that's a lot of money to pay for a company that has 12 employees that has been around for 18 months. But if you look at Facebook's balance sheet now, Instagram is worth $100 billion, actually over $100 billion. So the question I think we should all ask ourselves, and you'll get into this as you start thinking about business models and innovation, is why could Instagram do that with 12 employees, but Kodak couldn't do it with 125,000 employees? It's not that they didn't have access to the talent. They actually owned the intellectual property for the digital camera. They had access to customers, they had a very strong brand, they have a strong capital position and the best executive management in the world. But Instagram was able to disrupt it, and companies like Instagram were able to disrupt the entire industry and create $100 billion worth of value. That's 4 times the peak market cap of Kodak. Now imagine if you're an organization like Kodak, or any organization, UI included, where do we find the next Instagram within our organization and remove the barrier so that they can create that kind of value? And not just the next Instagram, the next 100 Instagrams. So as you start thinking about business model innovation, think about the ways that you can create ideas, not only to create value in new ways and potentially disrupt legacy industries, but remove the barriers that are going to stop you from getting the scale and growth and creating value at that level. So a couple of numbers that you might be interested in. There's a lot of talk around the accelerating pace of technology. One way to think about that is, several decades ago, it took 20 years for a company to become worth $1 billion. And now it's less than 18 months. And in COVID, it's accelerated even faster than that. I think Zoom, we're all on Zoom. Zoom went from, I think, 10 million customers online per month in December to 200 million customers in March. And then just a month later, Microsoft did exactly the same thing with Teams. And if you're familiar with TikTok, they've been in the news a lot lately. They've had over 2 billion downloads of TikTok in the last 5 months. So if you think about the pace of change, and Bill Gates said this, Bill Gates of Microsoft said this, he says, everybody overestimates the change that they're going to see in the next 2 years, but underestimates the change that we see in the next 10. That's usually true. And I think it's a good guidepost for exponential growth and exponential organizations. But with what's happening now with COVID, we're starting to see that level of change in the next 2 years. And I think this is a huge opportunity, a massive opportunity. We've talked to a lot of our clients and we've done recent surveys. Some of them have paused their transformation programs and innovation programs just in the immediate response to the COVID crisis. But we just surveyed a bunch of folks that are on another conference, C-level executives, 80% of the executive says, even in today's environment, it's riskier not to innovate than to innovate, right? If you're not able to innovate, move quickly, be agile, and respond to disruption right now, there are going to be lots of winners and losers after this COVID crisis. And the companies that can be more agile, more resilient, and innovate their way out of it stronger and better are going to win. And there are going to be a lot of other companies that aren't going to make it. So innovation is more important than ever before. I think that's, Christine, you told me to keep it to 15 minutes. So I'm going to, let me talk a little bit more, give me 2 more minutes maybe. But I wanted to set the stage for the business model innovation challenge that you're going into. So what is a business model? There's lots of different business models out there. I think a really useful one is a strategizer business model. You can search for it. It's called the business model canvas. It's got 9 components, 9 key components that you have to think about when you think about a business model. It all starts with the value proposition, right? And this goes back to my definition of innovation. How do you create new value, right? There's maybe, I think, 3 ways to make money. You can either create value through innovation, move value around and help facilitate that, transactional, or actually destroy value for money. And I think the companies who are going to win in the long term are the ones who can create value at scale. So having the right value proposition is important. A value proposition ties to multiple components of the business model canvas. The first one is your customer, right? Who is your customer, and how do you know that they want what you have to sell, right? So having that relationship is key. And then understanding your customer segment. It's not just all the customers out there, but who is your target customer and how well do you understand their needs? Because if you're a small business and you want to innovate, you need to be laser focused on a niche part of the industry, part of the business model, or sorry, a niche underserved need that your customer has that nobody else is serving. So that's important. Then the next question is, how do you get to your customers, right? How do you access that demand? So you need to understand what your distribution channels are going to be. On the other side of it is, now once you understand your customer, you've segmented and you know how to target them and you understand their specific needs and you figure out how you're going to get access to those customers through the right distribution channels. The next question is, what are the key activities you need to have, or what are the capabilities you need to have in order to create that value proposition and deliver it to your customers? So what are the resources that you need? People, capital, other resources, intellectual property, whatever it may need, whatever you may have to bring it together in order to create that value proposition. What are the activities or capabilities you need to support, the actions you have to take in order to take those resources and turn that into the value proposition? And who are the partners and stakeholders that you'll be working with? Because you can't do it yourself. You know, every business is part of an ecosystem. So who are the key partners you're going to have in all parts of this equation for this to work? And then at the bottom, it's your cost structure, right? And your revenue stream, right? If you're not making enough revenue to pay for your costs, then you're not actually creating value, you're actually destroying value. So you have to make sure that your business model includes a way to create more revenue than your cost, than the cost you're incurring, or reduce your costs. So those are at a very high level. I'm sure you've all studied this in way more depth, but at a very high level, the 9 components of a business model that are laid out in the business canvas model. And all business models will have similar things: customer, product, distribution, cost, operations, etc. But I think the strategizer one is a very useful model to use.
Thanks, Roger. Before we go into the Q&A, can you touch on a little bit of the difference of innovating around the identified customer? So like in the case of small business owners, the folks in the room, if they are innovating and creating a solution for the business owner versus their customers versus their employees, like maybe you might have an opinion of where to start or where people should innovate, or what does that look like when you flip the model on who your customer is?
Yeah. So definitely understanding who your customer is, whether or not it's the end consumer or a business partner or somebody in the supply chain or a vendor. That's understanding their specific needs and how they're being met or not met today, and whether or not there's an area where there's dysfunction or inefficiency where you can arbitrage that inefficiency by investing capital and resources in order to create a value proposition. That said, it's more complicated than ever today to get involved in the market. We're seeing B2B players turn into B2B2C players. We're seeing B2C players start to move up into the B2B market, serving small businesses in that segment. We're seeing ecosystems of players work together and orchestrators sitting on top of those ecosystems to curate those ecosystems, very much like Amazon Marketplace and things like that. So that conversation about who your customer really is and how you create value for that customer, I think is an important one. And understanding that it's going to be much more dynamic and ecosystem based today than it ever was before. There's the old adage that if you're not paying for something, you're not the customer. Have you ever heard that? Right? So if you think that you're the customer of Facebook, you're wrong, because you're not paying Facebook for anything. You're their product. Facebook's customers are the merchants and the advertisers that they work with. So that's one example of, you need to make sure that you understand who your real customer is and how you're creating value for that customer.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's open up the time for Q&A from anyone in the audience. You can unmute yourselves and ask your question, or you can type it up in the chat room and we'll find it there. Okay, so I have another question. Since you're from EY, you probably work with a lot of large businesses. Have you seen, in terms of small businesses, like any trends for business model innovation? Or like, is there a difference between large business and small business?
Yeah, there definitely is. I think, yes and no. So small businesses, I mean, you have to be laser focused. You can't compete with the big players on efficiency or cost or distribution platforms or analytics. So you really need to be, take advantage of maybe the proximity to a market or proximity to a customer base, and take advantage of it. Hyper locality is going to be key, because that's an advantage that a big player may not be able to replicate across their entire network. Really understand your customers more deeply in a way that larger organizations can't, because they have to have larger, chunkier segments, and then make sure that you're serving an underserved need, a niche need in that market that can't be served. So you have to understand customers very deeply in order to get to that specific unmet need. Take advantage of your agility and responsiveness. I mean, being big has its advantages, but being small and nimble also does as well. If you can anticipate changes in the market or your customer preferences faster than the larger players, and then be responsive to that need faster, then you're going to be able to lock in that customer base. And then this is the same for big companies and small companies, is you have to build a distinctive brand. You have to differentiate from Amazon. You have to differentiate from your competitor next door. So how do you create that distinctive brand? And it doesn't have to be necessarily funky or weird or quirky. It just means, what is your laser focus? And especially as in the small business space, it really does need to be tied to the culture and the principles and the passions of the owners of that business. Otherwise, it's not authentic or genuine, and it's not sustainable.
Right. Thank you.
Hello there. Can I jump on?
Yes, please.
Hello, everyone.
Sure.
My name is Ola. My question has to do with how radical ideas get to be. So we were having a discussion yesterday with my potential team, and we were kind of split around just an incremental innovation type situation, or something a bit further, up the value chain. In my opinion, I feel, given we're in the midst of a pandemic, there's maybe a lot more tolerance for something, maybe a little bit out there. So I wanted to get what your opinions were on that. So that's it.
It's a risk reward. Yeah, good question, Ola. I think it's a risk reward question. Disruptive innovation definitely has higher returns. You're talking unicorns, 10x, crazy off the wall stuff. What you may not see, though, is 95%, 99% of those companies don't make it. So it comes down to how predictable, how certain are you of the outcomes, the ROI question. It's really hard to do an ROI or return on investment on a very disruptive greenfield 10x, moonshot business model. It's a lot easier to invest in what we call optimizing or sustaining innovation, just because you have clearer line of sight into the return, or what we call adjacent innovation, which is taking an idea from one market or one function to another market or function, where you kind of know it's going to work, but you're just using it in a new way, right? The truly disruptive stuff, the Ubers, the Teslas, obviously the Facebooks, obviously there's massive upsides, but for every single one of those companies, there are 99 or thousands of other companies that didn't make it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, this is Will. So I could give you a little background on how I got into this challenge. So one of the Chinese laundromats in my building, basically, they've been in business over 30 years. They have like 8 stores throughout Manhattan, Brooklyn. And basically the whole COVID just knocked them down. They said they have 80% of the business down. Obviously people are not dry cleaning their clothes. They're not here in Manhattan or Brooklyn. And just going in there, dropping off my clothes, and I noticed a couple of things. It's that one, they only take cash and check. Just look at my notes here. They don't have a website, even though they have 8 stores, right? All the 30 years in business, they have locations, almost all cash. So it's almost like, I even offer to say, do you not know how to go online? Do you need help in that sense? But they don't seem to want to, it's almost like, it seems like a hopeless situation. It's not so much a language barrier, but it seems like they seem like they lost hope. It's like, so competing in this impact challenge, I want to see how we can bring hope back to these small businesses, which I walked down the street on Lexington today, I saw more businesses folding. It's almost like a black hole that's starting in almost all of them are starting to fold. And without these small businesses, the economy can't survive. And so it's almost like, I know you're talking to the big picture and I came from a world in Goldman and worked those years and deal with the innovation that way. But it's more the small business that's fueling this, and I'm seeing them collapse and dragging a lot of other businesses with them, right? Because they employ different people. The impact is. So I think the question is, how do we take what we know and how can we change it on a small scale and push it forward to them? So that's what we're kind of stuck with right now. So we're hashing out ideas how we can bring change to the small business, but making them realize that there's help there, they need to, but they seem to have lost that hope, feeling that they can survive anymore. They're just folding. They told us they're going to fold their business as of September 30th.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It is a challenge. I mean, consumer preferences are changing. People are more concerned about health and safety and using cash. And if companies aren't able to respond and innovate in response and make changes, and they can't create that value that value proposition for their customer because the environment has changed, that's going to be a very tough business model to run. I like what you're saying though, William, which is, there may be challenges and obstacles in order to deploy some of these technologies into the small businesses because they don't have the investment capacity or the access to some of these technologies to do it at scale. Is there a value proposition to say a third party can come in and create platforms for those organizations? So your customer is the business owner and your value proposition is being able to give them a fast track or an easy way to get online or take contactless payments because they can't do it. That's a value proposition. Then the key question is, can you do that in a cost-effective way? Are you generating enough revenue to offset your cost? Do you have access to the resources and the partners to do that? And then are you creating a distinctive service that can't be duplicated by someone else who can outcompete you because they've got deeper pockets, for example? So I think it's the right idea, but it's the same challenges that you would have with any other business model once you get into what the value proposition and the customer is.
Yeah, thank you. My partner and I have been going through some of these points that you just mentioned, and I think it's going to be part of our business model proposition.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, any other questions?
I got a question from the chat. Yeah. Is there a question, live question?
You can go ahead.
Christine, I see a question in the chat. Should I just take this one from the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So it's how do you tackle projects with your innovation team? Should our team start with throwing ideas around, or is there something else that we should start with? There's a couple of methodologies on innovation. One good place to start, almost universally everyone uses an agile methodology to drive innovation, sprint-based, short, iterative processes. You can read about that online. Lots of toolkits to do that. An important component of that is upfront using the design thinking process. So also another thing that you can look at online, design thinking is exactly this ideation process. How do you open the aperture, be very expansive and diverse in the way that you're thinking about the problem, coming at it from a lot of different perspectives. And then once you've gone through that divergent cycle, go through a convergent phase to take those ideas, integrate them together, and then filter them down to the ones that'll work. And then rapidly test and learn through an iterative cycle. And that can be done on a paper basis. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the market, but eventually you want to do that in the market as well. So I would suggest agile methodologies and then design thinking approaches. And then we at EY, we have our own proprietary methodologies that we use as well.
I also had a question on this, Cameron. I guess for innovation, do you suggest having, I don't know, 3 different innovation platforms or ideas you have and, running it with the business, or do you suggest being very focused and having like one innovative product or idea and just running with that, like all or nothing kind of thing, I guess?
I think it depends on whether or not you're the innovator or you're managing innovation. So if you're an organization and you're investing in innovation, you have to invest in a portfolio of innovation because not everything's going to work. By definition, you're not sure if it's going to work. And the statistics say that only 1 out of 20 things actually get all the way through the funnel. So you have to manage it as a portfolio. If you're thinking I'm going to spend, $1 million, $10 million, $100 million on this particular business issue, you set up almost like a VC fund. You set up a fund and you say, okay, now that I've set aside $10 million to solve this business issue, how do I spend that 10 million most efficiently to get through as many ideas as I can, right? So I want to make mistakes as cheaply and as quickly as I can, right? Because I know I'm going to have to make a lot of mistakes to get through this. And then what's left over are the good ideas that I can invest to scale. So that's on managing innovation as an organization. But if you're an innovator, you have to go all in on it. You can't be like trying 10 different things and not sure which one is there. The innovator has to, if you look at it as a product management process, someone has to own the product from they have to believe in it. They have to come up with the idea. They have to do the test and learn. They have to come up with a strategy, take it all the way through its life cycle. Like the founder of a startup, right? Most founders of a startup aren't founding multiple startups at the same time. It's just, it's too hard to do. That said, come up with an idea, push it. If it doesn't work and it fails, try it again, right? Elon Musk was on his 3rd or 4th failure by the time he started Twitter. I don't know how well his flamethrower company, but Tesla seems to be going pretty well. So, getting the ideas out there, being passionate about it and pushing them and being laser focused on it is important. But then also, if it fails, and then you move on.
Definitely. All right, thanks.
Hey, Roger, this is Mayor. A question for you. How do you kill innovation ideas?
It's a good question. That comes from experience. I can tell you've tried to kill zombie projects. They just go on forever.
Because I've seen many a times.
It's actually a question I get a lot.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, I think you were probably going to bring up the same thing I was going to bring up. A lot of times projects keep on going and you can't kill them because they're pet projects or someone believes in them so strongly or someone committed to an ROI in an annual budget. And so now they have to make it work, even though it doesn't make sense anymore.
Yep.
So here's what we do. It's impossible to kill a project. They'll just keep on coming back. So we don't kill projects. We just stop funding them. And we don't commit to funding a project to completion. If a project's going to cost, let's say $5 million and it's going to generate $100 million of sales, we say, well, that's nice. Those are interesting numbers. But I want to know what your first milestone is. I will fund you to the first milestone, right? If you hit that milestone, then we'll evaluate you for the next round of funding, just like a startup in a VC round, right? If you don't hit that milestone, then you don't qualify for the next round. So that's just the way that it works. And so in that way, Your portfolio is always going to be on projects that can hit the milestones that they commit to or the metrics that they commit to, and you don't release funding until the next round. And it also creates a very laser focus on those product teams, just like a founder would, to do whatever it takes to get access to that next round of funding. So it's kind of a very similar alignment of motivations and goals.
Thanks, Roger, for the perspective on this.
Sure.
Hi, Roger. I have a question. As an innovator, we make a lot of assumptions. We make assumptions about the customer, about the values that we create, about the market. And I know that assumption, I believe that good assumption will lead to their big success, and bad assumption will lead to terrible failure. So, but can you tell me like how to like minimize the risk of making the wrong assumption? Because I believe that my team will meet today and we'll sit together and we throw out like a lot of ideas and we say like, hey, this idea might be good, but I think when we bring it out into a reality, it will fail. So that's why like I would say like 80% of the businesses and startup failed in the end because they make assumption, they believe it is good, but then it's failed. So yeah, my question is how to make good assumption and yeah.
I think there's probably two things you can do. In your small groups, I'm a very strong advocate of the champion challenger process, where if you have an idea, you know, to avoid the possibility of groupthink, where everyone's like, oh, that's a good idea. You know, I like this person, I'm going to support them. And, you know, we want to like lift people up and build them up. And, you know, that's all great. But sometimes it doesn't allow you to surface issues or assumptions. So the champion challenger model is basically someone is designated as the champion for that idea and someone is designated as the challenger for that idea, and they just work it out. It doesn't mean that they agree or disagree. That's just their job, is to champion and challenge that particular thing. So you can identify and surface all those points and then work through them, you know, on a tabletop basis or in a workshop to just kind of work through the issues and you know, see where you end up. That said, that still doesn't guarantee that you're not going to go into it with some bad assumptions. The only way that you can validate your bad assumptions, any of your assumptions, is to test it in the market. So if you've read Lean Startup by Eric Ries, right, you know that the core principle of a startup is the MVP, the minimum viable product, which is how fast and how cheap can you get something into market to test it with the only user that matters, which is the end user, right? That's the only way to validate your assumptions. So the MVP principle is very simply, don't spend $1 more on anything until you know for sure that it's going to work. And the only way that you're going to know that it's going to work is put in the hands of your end user. So that tension creates the minimum viable product. And
just to add there,
most companies, you said 80% failure rate, it should be 95% failure rate. And if you know that you're going to make 19 mistakes every time you get one thing right, you're going to want to make those mistakes as cheaply and efficiently and safely as possible.
I see.
And just to add to what you said, Roger, I would highly encourage all the participants to go down, speak with the small businesses, understand what is going through, and the kind of insights that you will get will be invaluable in your project that you are going to be presenting. So go out onto the streets, talk to the people who are really going through it. And that will help you understand and gain insights.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because in the startup community, in the VC community, the first question that a VC firm will ask a startup company before they invest is product market fit. Who's your customer? And how do you know they want your product? And if they can't give a good answer, the answer is very simple. Like, well, we've given them the product and they like it. If they don't say that, they don't invest. Why would you invest in something if you don't know that there's going to be product market fit? Yeah, so absolutely, you have to go talk to people. And it used to be, I don't know if you've seen videos. IDEO does a bunch of this stuff. It's part of the design thinking process, but very low fidelity demos. Like they basically draw like a phone on a piece of cardboard, and they say, hey, use this phone. And they actually see how users use it. That's the lowest, cheapest way to test out that idea. So that's what you want to do. You want to have that principle in mind. Don't polish it, right? Don't try to oversell it. Don't try to overwhelm and impress people with the final product. Use that process to learn. That's because that's what it's for. Okay, I could probably take one more question before I have to run. All right.
Thank you so much, Roger.
Yeah, sure. It's been my pleasure, Christine. So I'll close with just one final thought, and I'm sure you've all famously heard the quote from JFK that the Chinese character for crisis is the intersection of risk and opportunity, which ends up being wrong. I don't think that's accurate, but it's true. I mean, conceptually, it's true though. We're in a moment of crisis, and there's a lot of risk, but there's also a lot of opportunity, and all the systems and processes that were locked in and over-optimized really over the last decade are all being thrown in disarray. And now we need a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs to come in and reinvent how business works, reinvent how we engage customers, reinvent how we manage employees, reinvent how we create value in this new environment. So huge opportunity for all of you, and then huge opportunity for the entrepreneurial small business owners that are out there who are probably having a lot of anxiety now, but I like to think that talent is a market where supply generates demand. As long as there's talented people, smart people, people who are willing to put in the work, they will find ways to create value. So it might not be what they're doing today, but if we can help them with platforms and capabilities and innovation to create something new, then they'll all be okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Roger. Thank you for taking your time to help us. And I'm sure a lot of people here feel that they, in terms of business model, that they feel a little bit smarter today as a result. So we'll keep in touch and let you know what comes out of our challenge. Thank you.
Yeah, please do. And if any of you want to reach out and connect on LinkedIn, I'm just Roger Park on LinkedIn. Get connected. Thanks.
Thank you. And for everyone else, you can stick around if you have any questions about the challenge. We can take them now. We have about 15 minutes or so where we could do that. And people were talking about having multiple ideas. I just wanted to bring up, if your team can't come to an agreement about which idea to go after, that might be a good time to split and each take an idea. That happens all the time. Sometimes people merge back together. So there'll be a lot of forming and splitting in the beginning. So don't be afraid to do that. So
I mean, the most important thing is have fun.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, fun, and people will be learning a lot too. So we definitely see this as an educational opportunity and also an opportunity to help small businesses. So thank you guys for your time and for your interest in helping small businesses. If there are no questions about the challenge,
I have a question. So part of the project or the deciding the business model is like the scalability of the business model, correct? Like where it can apply. So just like wanted to clarify, we're going to be choosing and maybe the area of small businesses we want to focus on. Or I mean, we can choose to focus on all areas, but we need to choose like the restaurant business or like the dry cleaning business area. So that's part of the project is deciding which area we want to focus on, correct?
Yeah, I would recommend doing that. If your idea ends up being able to scale across all small businesses, that's something that can happen later. But at least in this first step, I would highly recommend focusing on one industry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Can I add to that, Christine? Maybe even not even one industry, but you're even within an industry, you're going to have several different like mechanisms or people who deliver in different ways. So you might even want to hone in even further than an industry, like Roger was saying, having that laser focus and make sure part of your customer discovery is interviewing actual business owners who who use that, you know, and not just kind of spinning your own ideas.
Mhm. And Christine, a quick question for you. Will the actual implementation of the idea have any brownie points from a judging perspective?
If your idea has been implemented and being used right now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
during the same stage. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. That would prove out the
Market validation.
yeah, validation and yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Maya, you're saying for you're gonna do a prototype, or you actually gonna do the MVP by the deadline, or are you saying for the next phase?
The first phase, like
Do you-
an MVP along with, yeah, MVP.
Okay.
Wow. Cool. Any other questions? So you can also email us at challenge@Ascend Leadership. Is that it? Okay, we just created the email address. That's why I can't remember it. But challenge@ascendleadership.org. So that's the email. If you are not on Slack, I would highly recommend it because we're sharing good information there. If you didn't get the Slack channel workspace, it's because maybe you haven't registered because we include it in the welcome packet because we don't want to give it out to everyone. So, so yeah, if you haven't done those things, I highly recommend doing that. If you created your team, be sure to create a channel for your team so that both the staff from the challenge side and then your mentor can find you easily. That helps a lot. So all of that is outlined in the welcome packet too. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, we'll adjourn here. Thank you everyone very much for your time, and please contact us later if you have any other questions. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.